everybody, I'm Eugene Kaspersky, and welcome to our transparency and information sharing event. Well, we're living in a cyberspace which is getting, unfortunately, more and more aggressive. There are many cyber criminals and different actors developing the different kinds of the cyber threats, and they behave in a cyberspace which doesn't have borders. So that's why it's very important to be more close to each other, to build a better world, to build a better communications. That's why we have this event. So, thank you for joining, enjoy this time, and please learn more and share more information. Thank you very much, Eugene Kaspersky.
I couldn't agree more with you, Eugene. Today, when we think about cyber threats, for all of us, we're definitely living in a borderless kind of society. My name is Ali Hirji, and I lead the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation at Durham College. I think it goes without saying that for the last year or so, we've been in a very tumultuous time in society across the world. From protecting ourselves physically from the pandemic to now safely granting access to the vaccine, we're seeing evolutions also and new nomenclatures in the world of cyber threats. And now is an opportune moment to talk about how we share intelligence and share best practices. In my sector, in the world of academia, over the last year, my colleagues have reported to me that nearly 80% of institutions have reported some form of an attack, and with very limited access or knowledge of how to functionalize or operationalize threat intelligence. So today, we'll take a deep dive into proactive cybersecurity practices and look at threat intelligence feeds. From understanding your traditional frameworks of developing databases around threat intelligence, typical standards like STIX, TAXI, to looking at how attribution works, to looking at how we can establish trust, and to more importantly, looking at how we can build community around threat intelligence. Welcome to the second episode of In the Node. We're at a critical juncture in our history, and at this node, we will be discussing an important topic of how we can bring ourselves together. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's we have strength in numbers. And today's conversation for In the Node is going to be on strength in numbers, building safer communities through sharing threat intelligence. As I mentioned before, my name is Ali Hirji, coming to you live from the province of Ontario, the beautiful city of Oshawa. And I'm going to take the next couple of minutes to introduce my guests, but also have them say a thing or two about the work that they do. From beautiful Oshawa, I'm going to take the scenic route and head up to Atlantic Canada, where I'm going to welcome my friend, somebody that I've got to know over the last few months, Sheldon Shaw from CyberNB. Sheldon, welcome to In the Node. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what's got you to this session today? Sheldon?
Thanks. Yes, I'm Sheldon Shaw. I'm the Vice President of Innovation at CyberNB. As Ali was saying, we're based in Fredericton, New Brunswick. We are a membership-based entity, and we provide threat intelligence as well as analytics to our members. Thank you.
Fantastic, Sheldon. And Sheldon, I'm super excited to also get the Canadian context around sharing threat intelligence and some of the amazing initiatives that you're spearheading out in New Brunswick. Sheldon, welcome again. From Atlantic Canada, I'm going to take a flight first to my new friend, Nate, the man with the mighty beard, the man who has a lot to talk about when it comes to sharing how he's built community around threat intelligence. Nate, tell us the company that you work for, what is it that you do, and why are you excited to be here today at In the Node? Nate?
Hey, thanks, Ali. Yeah, I'm Nate Warfield. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Prevailion, which is a Houston-based company specializing in a very unique methodology of infiltrating and tampering with attacker command and control networks. Formerly, before I was here, I was over at Microsoft for a bunch of years. I worked for the Defender EDR client team. And then one of the things, probably the biggest reason I'm here is last year in March, myself and 3 other gentlemen started a group called CTI League, which was a pro bono group of InfoSec professionals that basically just collaborated, used their free time and their skills to provide threat intelligence to hospitals and healthcare networks that were under attack by these bad actors. And we did this entirely for free. We didn't sell any of the data. It was all purely just to do the right thing and try to, take care of the first responders that were, helping people stay alive. We figured someone needed to help keep them being able to do their jobs. So very excited to talk about community here.
Absolutely. And Nate, thank you for the work that you do for our frontline staff. And in our first question, when we dive into the conversation, we're going to go deep into what you started off with and also unpack some of the context in the United States right now, especially with the recent pipeline attack. Now that I've crossed the borders into the US, might as well pay a visit to my friend Randy. Randy, first of all, thank you for choosing me to moderate this session. But more importantly, Randy, tell our audience a little bit about what you do and why are you excited to be here at In the Node.
Thanks, Ali. I'm the head of enterprise sales for North America for Kaspersky. So we work with some of the larger organizations in the US and Canada. And specifically, my team covers the threat intelligence offerings that Kaspersky has, which is relevant to this discussion. And why I'm excited, we're talking about building a strong community and sharing intelligence. And Ali, when you and I first started talking about this subject, I kind of in my mind imagined the dream team that I would love to have on this episode, discussing this. And lo and behold, when we extended the offers out to Nate, Sheldon, and Sergey, they were all available and excited to join. So excited to have this strong community, speak to others about how to build strong communities through sharing threat intelligence.
Fantastic, Randy. And Randy, again, thank you always for being accessible to the community. I can say that here in Ontario, we've also benefited a great deal from your team's work and the fact that you're always approachable. And that's a key ingredient to building community. So Randy, I'm looking forward to the discussions with you. And Randy, if you don't mind, I'm going to borrow your jet and head over to Russia and welcome Sergey, my man who also has a mighty beard. It's getting there. Sergey, tell us a little bit about what you do and why you're excited to be In the Node today.
Thanks, Ali. First of all, impossible to compete regarding the beard with the other two gentlemen. But I'm trying. So am I. Due to pandemic. So you are. First of all, I'm very happy to be here and thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Nate and Sheldon, Randy, Ali for joining us as well. Hope it will be quite interesting and useful today. I'm Sergey Novikov. I'm based in snowing, cold Moscow City. Which is now in May, quite beautiful to be completely honest with you. I'm working for Kaspersky for more than 15 years, and for the last 10 years, I'm managing the famous global research and analysis team, working with very, very smart people in 20 plus different countries all over the world who are dealing on a daily basis with different kind of APT attacks, cybercrime attacks, IoT attacks, and so on and so forth. So working with threat intelligence directly. And every single day I'm learning from them something really interesting and new. That's why, again, I'm here and thank you for having me here.
You're always welcome, Sergey. And the breadth of experience that you have also with your math background, I think you'll be a very interesting addition to this conversation when we look at security just beyond pre-configured firewalls. Looking forward to how you've gathered feeds and your analysis of them, especially from an automation standpoint. Without further ado, I'm going to jump into the first question. And Nate, I think everybody in the audience, especially some of the comments that I saw, are really interested in learning more about the Open Global Volunteer Emergency Response Center that you've set up, specifically with healthcare institutions. At this time, we look at interoperability and the sharing of threat intelligence needs to be quick, it needs to be efficient. But the taxonomies of threat intelligence have changed. You've taken a bit of a target-centric approach. Tell us a little bit about what your approach has been and how you've built this volunteer group to facilitate the proactive sharing of threat intel. Nate, the floor is all yours.
Sure, thanks, Ali. So the CTI League was very interesting. It came about somewhat organically. So last year, it was actually March 13th, I believe. I was watching sort of InfoSec news, and I saw an article about a Czech hospital that had been hit by ransomware. And it sort of got me thinking. Some of the side research that I've done over the years has mostly been on network attack surface mapping, and I used to go and speak at conferences back when those were a thing. So I sort of dug into my toolbox and I did a quick, sort of perimeter hunt with the Shodan search engine. And what I found was somewhere along the lines of 300 hospitals that had Citrix NetScaler devices that were unpatched for a vulnerability that had come out a few months prior. And it really kind of hit me like a brick wall. I was like, wow, every single one of these is a target just waiting. This is a healthcare network just waiting to be shut down and patients that can't be treated. So I had put something out on Twitter, and then Ohad, one of my other founders, reached out and he said, hey, do you want to join? Do you want to start a group with me? I'm setting up a Slack. we probably assumed, we kind of figured we might have like 40 or 50 people helping out here and there on the weekends. Within a month, I think we had over 1,200 members from around the world. And what was really the way we were successful about it was really unique. We had both people from the InfoSec community that were there doing a lot of, I mean, it started off with sort of perimeter scans. We had people that showed up that started giving us feeds of COVID-related phishing domains that they were finding. I think we had somebody set up a MISP instance and started basically just pulling in all these feeds of data that they were already collecting. And they said, hey, you know what? We'll just share them in this group. And we started building some automation around filtering things out, looking for specifically like healthcare networks. And that was well and good. And one of the interesting lessons we learned somewhat the hard way was it turns out that hospital administrators don't really respond well when random people start reaching out and telling them there is an unpatched device on their network. We were met with everything from sort of just being ignored. We had some people think we were trying to blackmail them. So the way we actually worked around that was we had a bunch of members from different ISACs or ISAC groups, which are working groups that are sort of industry specific, right? There's financial ISACs, medical ISACs, healthcare ISACs. And so what we were really able to do that made us successful was leveraging the skills of the private sector, working in conjunction with these existing groups so that, when we found something for, a hospital in, the East Coast, instead of reaching out ourselves, we could just hand it over to the ISAC members and say, hey, do you guys have a contact here? And they almost always did. And they're like, sure, we can reach out. The message was better received that way. And then as the weeks went on, we ended up getting a bunch of law enforcement that showed up. So we ended up having members from CISA, Department of Homeland Security, we had Europol, Interpol, the FBI, we had local law enforcement from about maybe 10 or 15 different states. So it was very interesting to be able to use to just, basically trying to do good. And we had at our hands all the resources, both from reaching out to hospitals to handing over information to law enforcement. We were actually told by an anonymous member of one of the government agencies that we managed to do in a month what the US government had been trying to do and not successful for a decade. So that was kind of an amazing proof of concept.
No, absolutely. And I think that last line is powerful, right? In the last conference that I was a part of, somebody said, in security, we've gone decades without any innovation. And suddenly within weeks, we've seen decades of innovation. And that's something that you've achieved with your initiative. So hats off to you. For the audience that's listening, if you want to know more about this initiative, there's also some information posted on Cyber Exchange. I want to work with something, Nate, that you mentioned around building community and trust, moving away from competition to collaboration. And Sergey and Randy, I'll bring the conversation to you, starting with Sergey, and then we'll hop over to Randy. And this is more like when you look at the impressive approach that Nate has taken towards CTI and sharing, you kind of need to strike a balance between internally sourced data as well as externally sourced data or external observables. How do you build trust with organizations and get them to actually share some of their feeds with you for analysis? Sergey, let's start off with you.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, it's always quite complicated on one hand. On the other hand, we're trying. And thanks to Nate and thanks to the CTI League initiative, again, we cooperate a lot with such, let's call it like non-profit, just volunteering community organizations. We do have our internal sources. We do try to, as soon as we do have a different kind of partners all around the world, we are gathering a lot of external information as well. But it's very important to keep the balance, to find different kind of sources, not only one, but different kind of sources to prove what information you're working with, and can you trust to this kind of sources and so on and so forth. It's always, how to say, like a fine line, and based on our, again, experience of dealing with different kind of nation-sponsored attacks and cybercrime attacks, ransomware, let's say we are quite matured in working with this kind of threats, and based on our experience, we how to say, we manage to understand and verify whom we can trust and how we can dig the information from.
Absolutely, trust but verify. Randy, your perspective on what our colleague Sergey just said. Randy?
Yeah, anytime that we're working with an organization that's either developing or maturing their threat intelligence practice, we kind of start with, the data that they have themselves, the principle of know yourself first. So any organization should have internal intelligence that they're capturing, taking a look at and combing through it for any insight that they can take action on. That's something that, we may think is obvious, but oftentimes that can be overlooked. Then when you think about that external data that's obtained either through sharing information or commercial feeds, provided from organizations like Kaspersky, that should only be introduced when you need to provide context to what you're seeing, or kind of fill the gaps on the information that you have yourself, to either help protect your organization or get a heads up to some of the things that are happening within your community or to similar organizations. And as you're selecting that exterior data that you're bringing in, we encourage teams to be selective, because just getting more data isn't necessarily a good thing. And overload can lead to alert fatigue, false positives, and at the very least can make prioritization really difficult. So organizations should focus on bringing data from sources that are unique, relevant to them, and has the context that makes it actionable. And as far as giving back, when organizations realize that the information they're sitting on could potentially be unique, relevant, and actionable to others, they should really work within their organization, within their community, to set up the policies and kind of structure to share that data out with those who could benefit from it. And you don't do that just for good karma, but that will actually build a stronger community, which then helps the organization that's doing the sharing and kind of fostering that community that shares freely. It will benefit everyone involved. But when they venture out to sharing that information out, it is important to have structure and forethought to how that's done. And it should be a conversation throughout the organization. Legal teams need to be educated and included in the discussion, because there are concerns about sending too much information out there, or perhaps information that could be damaging to the organization. So don't try and circumvent your legal teams. Involve them in the conversation, because they really have the organization's best interest at heart, and can help you find that balance as to what you can share and how you can share it.
Randy, very well spoken. And if I ever need a fellow faculty member in data science, I'm hiring you, because that point that you made up about it's not just about voluminous data, but relevant data is extremely important. And Sergey and Randy, comes as no surprise that 400 million users globally use Kaspersky to stay on top of their threats and to stay protected. Sheldon, I'm going to ask you to hold for a couple of more minutes. There are a few questions that have come in from a Canadian context, and I'll weave you in very shortly. But a few more questions for Nate, Sergey, and Randall before we come back into Canada. Nate, let's talk more about the CTI League. In fact, I see Michael Kevin is throwing you a shout out and giving you a hello as he's watching this session live. So Michael, you've got a shout out right back at you. You're welcome. Nate, let's dive into this. So when you've put together this team of volunteers, let's face it, I've been a part of some of these. You need resources, time, virtual machines. So you need some money to support some of these things, or you need some in-kind donations. But then when you open things up in this way, you've also got multiple sources. How do you evaluate sources specifically in this new normal that we're in, entirely virtual? Nate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, actually, it's it sounds like about two questions. So in terms of the infrastructure, we were actually really blessed because both myself, Mark Rogers, who's another one of our founders, Chris Mills, another one of our founders, and Ohad Zeidenberg, we basically used our network of people that we knew in the industry. And we just kind of went out and sort of put our hands out and said, hey, we're doing this thing. This is the cause we're standing behind. Do you want to contribute? And we were fortunate enough that we were given Slack access. Slack gave us a free subscription to use. Shodan, Gray Noise, Virus Total, all donated API access so we could use their platforms to help hunt down. Because like I said, we were really initially focused on perimeter assessment. Just by the nature of how the organization was, there was not much we could do once it was past the perimeter, right? We were, even for the fact that most of us did a day job in the industry, we couldn't really conflict with our paying jobs to go and do this for free. So everybody was collaborating in that way. And then in terms of how we vetted all the feed data, honestly, we don't name names of the people that came into the league, but the people that came in and donated their access there was many people that were quite literally luminaries and very, very well known in the threat intel world that just kind of showed up and said, hey, would you like access to this feed? And we're like, we know you, we know who you are. There's people that pay for this access. So we're like, that's beautiful. That's great. We had some folks that were giving us feeds of, unfortunately, we did have one incident where we had a group that tried to misuse some of this data for commercial reasons, and we had to kick them out, and we ended up having to ban their entire company. But because our focus was trust, and you can't, when you have competing companies and people that work for competing companies, right? At the time I was at Microsoft, we had people there from Google, we had people there from Facebook, we had people from competition, but we were all working together. So we had to be very, very careful on, how data was shared, how data was used. But in terms of the feed data, we basically we got it and we knew it was solid. So it was that, at least that side of it was easy.
Absolutely. And I think you've raised a very important point, is that you've got to go out there and ask and build community out there. As we say in security, is that if you haven't found a breach or you haven't found a situation or a threat, it's because you're not looking hard enough. And community helps you with that search. So thank you so much for mentioning that. And we will come back. There's 1 or 2 questions that have come in around that process on sort of bringing people into the fold, bringing people into the league. And we'll unpack that a little bit later on. To the audience, keep your questions coming. Now, you mentioned, both Randy and as well as yourself, you mentioned this aspect of lots and lots of data. Sergey, I want to start with you, then go to Randy, and then we'll take our flight back into Canada. Sergey, this is around, when you think about all the pool of data that we have, external sources, internal sources, personal sources, there's a combination of human readable data and machine readable data. How do you manage those data sets? How do you synthesize them? And how do you see automation playing into evaluating all the various feeds that we're getting? Sergey, we'll start with you and then go to Randy.
Thanks, Ali. Again, as I said, it's about our experience, and you can't, as we discussed already, you can't trust to just one source. And as Nate mentioned already, it's not about competition. We are competing, of course, based as soon as we're a private company on the quality of our threat intelligence, quantity of our reports, and amount of details in those kind of reports. But still, talking about the sources, about the data, we are sharing even with our competitors, so the same as they are sharing with us. And it's about, again, trust to each other, trust to the knowledge we've managed to build during the last 10, 15 years, analyzing any kind of sophisticated attacks. And again, as we already discussed very briefly, but it's important to mention, you can't trust to just one source. You can't rely on one source. That's why working with threat intel, you need to verify many times the information you're working with.
Absolutely, trust but verify. Randy, if we can have you respond to that, but also shed a little bit more light on how you're dealing with the automation element around threat intelligence, and maybe even thinking through about the accuracy in some of the alerts that you're pushing out. Randy?
Yeah, when it comes to the automation and those feeds, it's very important to, set up systems, set up priorities so that, the most important alerts that you're getting, you understand some context there. And what we found too is, kind of shifting from the feeds to the finished intelligence reporting. A lot of times, that's where, when business decisions need to be made, when conversations have to happen in the boardroom, that's where those finished reports are so important, because that's where you get the context. That's something that came up in multiple conversations I had with customers last week at a security summit, where both a CISO and a head of product security from a manufacturing organization, 2 separate manufacturing organizations, kind of brought up this subject. And they've got newer threat intelligence teams, and they're discovering things and bubbling them up the chain saying, I'm concerned about this. We've discovered that, and that inevitably leads to 3 questions. Why should we be concerned? How do we measure this risk? And what should we do about it? And it's hard to answer those questions with the data found in a feed. and that's where our finished reporting is really helpful. Something that's written by humans, compiled either by an internal threat researcher or purchased from an external source, similar to Kaspersky. These reports are designed to be read by humans. Their executive summary is designed to give leadership teams in an organization the context and business implications that they need to understand in order to make good decisions, while also within the content of those reports having some of the deeper information, more technical information, like IOCs and YARA rules, which will help the security teams actually execute and take action, on once the decision is made. And although we are a CTI vendor, we do have commercial offerings. We're also providing this information to the public, for free as well. Through things like our open threat intelligence portal, through the articles we publish on SecureList, and even during the early stages of the pandemic, we reached out to healthcare organizations to see if there were gaps in their protection, and we made available to those in need, those who were coming under fire like they had never seen before, made available enterprise solutions to them free of charge, in order to make sure that we were, a strong community and able to fight both, the threat actors and also this pandemic as a united front.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Randy. And to our audience, you're seeing little nice information blurbs posted as you're watching this session on Cyber Exchange. I also invite you to go to the Kaspersky group, where you'll get access to some of the reports that Randy mentioned, and you can download them or go to the Kaspersky site as well and read some of them. And in one of those reports, I read a beautiful line that suggested the approach to threat intelligence is that it's not a platform, it's a strategy. And Randy, I'm going to come back to that strategic element very, very shortly. But from the US, I'm going to go back to Atlantic Canada and bring my friend Sheldon into the conversation. Sheldon, you've got a lot of perspective here from the US, from Russia, from around the world. I think it comes as no surprise, right, that the healthcare institutions, unfortunately, are a growing target of concern when it comes to security perspective. Tell us a little bit about CyberNB and the community that you're building in Canada and enabling people to share threat feeds and share intelligence with one another. The floor is all yours, Sheldon.
Yeah, if I can just turn back, because I think what Nate is talking about is quite important. It's really not the status quo, really, if you think about it. So even if his CTI league was not a success, it's still, we have to flip the switch. We have to turn the tables back around and make sure that we work like that. So if you get attacked, if you're a healthcare, you're in education or an energy sector, if you get attacked, typically your BCP plan is basically put your head down, communicate to all the important directors, make sure you get your lawyers, make sure you get your PR ready, and then communicate. Well, what Nate was doing was, completely opposite. It's basically bring everybody in so that they can help everybody else. And that's going to have to be the way as we move forward in cyber threat intelligence and cyber analytics. So at CyberNB, we're trying to do that. We're trying to bring in groups of members at the outset before there's an incident. We get them threat intelligence through their MESP, and then we provide them an analytical fabric. So we're running behavioral analytics, trying to find new APTs. We're also trying to combine that with threat intelligence. And so the membership that we work with typically spend less money on threat intelligence. They spend less money on cyber defenses, and we're trying to arm them before something happens. And what we've done is, if there's an attack, the entire collective can be called upon. So we've already written that into some IP sharing as well as a membership agreement, so that once you sign up, you get the threat intelligence, but if you need help from another member, you can call upon them to get that.
Yeah, I think, Sheldon, you've raised a very important point, is that you got to start somewhere. And even if you're starting with limited amount of information, you've got to direct it in the right spaces in order to then start building community. And I do have a few more questions. One that's actually come to you direct message, which I'll come to towards the end. And thank you to the audience member for sharing that question. So Sheldon, thank you for bringing the Canadian voice to the table. And I'll continue on to my next set of questions. And this, Randy, I want to come back to you because, you mentioned this earlier on that, when it comes to sharing threat intel feeds, it's not just what you're sharing, but who you're sharing it to. And you need to know your audience, because threat intel feeds operate in a bit of a context. So tell us some more. These threat intel reports that you're providing, they're not just being consumed by the Nates, the Sheldons, the Sergeys, and the Alis of the world. They're being consumed by CMOs. They're being consumed by CAOs. They're being consumed by mayors, being consumed by business development folks. How do you ensure the threat intel feeds are actionable, readable, and relatable to a wider audience? Randy?
Yeah, it really comes down to that context. Sometimes these conversations, and it's interesting that I'm fielding this question because some of those deeper points, especially when I joined Kaspersky a year ago, I could barely spell Yara as opposed to understanding some of the deeper things that Sergey and his team talk about on a daily basis. So that's where I saw some of the real gold that the great team was creating. And in the threat researchers and the threat analysts that we were dealing with, who were already big fans of what Kaspersky was doing in that area, at times had a hard time fully expressing to folks within their organization that were less technical, the urgency of some of the things that they were seeing and the business implications. And I think two things have happened in the last year. I think the severity and the volume of attacks that we've been seeing, the impact that we're seeing has increased greatly. So, lay people, my friends that, understand better what I do for work now because of what they're reading in the news every day, and there's more attention on it. But really being able to take, both the things that we discover on the technical side, but having a way to clearly express why an organization should pay attention to this and what the course of action should be, being able to assess risk and make decisions based on that is something that we're working on and really focusing on those executive summaries so that people understand the context of the things that we're bringing to them.
Absolutely. I think those executive summaries, but also some of the designs, the infographics that have been put out as well. I really actually liked one, which I know is on the Kaspersky group as well, which summarizes threat intelligence since 2010 and where it's gone since there. And I'm going to, Sergey, just go a little bit off our dance and bring you into this conversation as well. Because, like that infographic, which I'm sure you've seen, we've gone beyond just blacklisting certain IPs. We've gone to much more complex systems now. How do you sort of ensure that the audience gets it? Have you reshaped some of the techniques that you're using? Give us a little bit of insight from your world as well on how you're approaching making that data more relatable for a wider audience. Sergey?
Thanks, Ali. What also we are doing for this is we are always talking to our customers and partners. So we are always looking for their feedback, for their needs, what is interesting, how to use our threat intelligence. It's always about learning from each other. We are sharing some kind of informal or formal trainings and workshops with them, as soon as asking for their feedback and thoughts, what we can improve, what is good and bad for them. So it's ongoing discussion with our existing customers and partners, which is quite important in my humble opinion. Keeping in mind the quality of our APT reporting, financial reporting, our feeds is, again, we're trying to get better. We're trying to improve the quantity and quality of our services, especially during these days when the number of threats is growing, the quantity of threats is growing. And we've discussed it already a couple of times. The environment, the infrastructure is growing due to pandemic, more and more devices we're using, virtual environment, and so on and so forth, supply chain attacks, affiliate networks, and so on and so forth. So we need to be prepared and we need to educate our customers. That's what we are doing on a daily basis, to be completely honest.
Absolutely. If you're failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And I think that preparation is a very important element of how you share threat intel. Now, you mentioned also about speaking to clients and then looking at how you can bring them all together. Sheldon, let's bring you back into the conversation, because out at CyberNB, you've launched an initiative, or in the weeds of it right now, an initiative called CSOC, which brings threat intelligence feeds together. It probably has a SIEM solution in place as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what CSOC is about? Go into a little bit of detail and tell us how you're distributing actionable intelligence through a centralized initiative like CSOC. Sheldon?
Sure. So the Critical Infrastructure Security Operations Center really focuses on those critical infrastructures in Canada and around the world. we're trying to pair up threat intelligence to assets. So I think one of the problems we have right now is that we just go out and collect threat intelligence, but we have no understanding of what assets we have. So the threat intelligence may be towards a certain vector, but in critical infrastructure, there's a lot of command and control system that may not be applicable to it. So we're trying to get the community to start to generate their own threat intelligence, pair it up with purchase threat intelligence, and then return that back out to the community. So we're at the very nascent stages of it. We started in February. We've brought on a few members already, as well as some private data feeds. And, we're looking to kind of roll that out further. The interesting thing is the more members that come in, the better the solution is. It's similar to what happened with Nate. And if you go from 30 to 1200, all of a sudden you can solve a lot more problems. So very nascent stages, but we're hoping over the next coming months or weeks, we'll get a lot more members involved and start generating a lot better threat intelligence for the community.
Speaking about getting a lot more members involved, one of the questions that came to me direct message was on if someone wanted to get involved with CSOC, is it strictly for Canadian institutions or can it be anyone across the world? Sheldon, do you want to field that quick?
Yeah, absolutely. It's for anyone right now. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. And to the audience, you'll see the little tickers below if you're looking for a link to how to get in touch with the team, or you can connect with them on Cyber Exchange and further those conversations. Nate, I want to bring you back into the conversation because, we spoke a little bit right at the very get-go about taking a target-centric approach. But I do want to understand your perspective, and then we'll go to Sergey on the same question, and that is on how do you strike a balance? Because we tend to focus, can we perhaps focus less on targets or more on vectors? Or is there a balance that you're looking to strike between just looking at the targets versus assessing the vectors of attack? Nate, can you give us some perspective?
So at least in CTI League, we really knew what the targets were, right? It was healthcare. And, like I said earlier, what we were very successful at doing was perimeter assessments, right? And so this started with Citrix, and then last year and around the 4th of July, there was an F5 device vulnerability that we found hundreds more. So we were not really so worried about the vector, because we really knew the only vector we could help with was, insecure deployments on the perimeter of their network, or if we were able to, give them some sort of information about, we had a member that was sharing lists of RDP credentials that were being sold on the dark web. So we were mining through those and pulling out, basically mapping out IPs and figuring out which ones were in hospitals, and then using the ISAC connection to say, hey, somebody sold access to one of your RDP servers.
Right.
So yeah, that's how we handled that.
Same question, Sergey, your perspective as well on what you heard from Nate. Sergey?
It's almost the same, and I do agree with Nate. For us, it's quite an important, especially as we discussed, especially today, when we observed an outsourcing of the initial access from the dark side, in which, again, several cyber criminal groups are getting together in order to deliver their operations. For example, like one group obtained the initial access in the network, and then they just pass it to another group who does the lateral movement, exfiltration, and in the end, they start the ransomware or any kind of other attacks. So this kind of a cooperation on their side for us as well, it's quite important to look both into the targets and to the attacking vectors, how those kind of a supply chain attacks work, who are behind them, and so on and so forth. So it's always, as you asked, it's always about the balance, looking to both. You can't focus on just the targets. It's completely impossible to understand.
Very well said. And I think I want to come back to that a little bit later on, but I do see a couple of questions. And again, a couple of shout outs from Nathan's fan club that's out there, giving him a lot of props, and also giving a prop out to Sheldon for opening initiatives beyond just Canadian context, but inviting more players and actors to the table. I'm going to take this question and spin it a little bit. And Nate, we'll start off with you. And this has to do with the recent pipeline attack that we've seen in the US. Do you feel that initiatives like the CTI could actually now encompass other critical infrastructure and bring in government, federal level into this to start sharing threat intelligence feeds more effectively? Nate, your perspective, and then I'll actually go around to see what everybody else thinks about this. Nate?
Thanks. Yeah, I absolutely think that model could work for these other sectors. In fact, it's been over a year since we started the league, and we've You know, we were very busy in the beginning, and then it sort of, as the attacks shifted towards the, you know, as we all are seeing with, you know, attachments with C2 beacons and things that the league wasn't really set up to defend against, right? We didn't have XDR software that we could go and help run on people's networks. So what we really looked at it as, it was a proof of concept. And what we demonstrated was that the private sector, working with government, working with, you know, these nonprofit groups, could be extreme. There was a force multiplier for how quickly we were able to provide actionable data to people, and not only help, like, you know, help them use it, but have them trust that where it came from was not, you know, it wasn't a sales pitch. It wasn't, you know, there was no catch-22 to getting it. They were just like, wow, thank you. You're giving us free information. You're helping us defend ourselves. And we'd actually had started looking at whether there was other critical infrastructure sectors that we could be effective in. The tricky part, I think, was the fatigue of 2020. You know, after a while, people being stuck in the house all day, we noticed the first few months was this huge burst of activity. We were watching just the crazy amount of communication going on. As the year wore on, we could see people we could just see the fatigue. But yeah, I think it absolutely is being able to share without worrying, you know, without the bottom line being sort of the most important factor. Whether you're looking at, hey, these are parts of society that just need to be kept running, no matter, like, it doesn't matter about the money. What matters is that, you know, water, gas, you know, fuel, healthcare, things that we all rely on for daily life need to not be messed with.
Absolutely. And I want to work with that just a little bit. And Sheldon, if we can bring you into the conversation, but Randy and Sergey, get your engines ready, because 2 questions have come in to you specifically about the pipeline attack. But Sheldon, let's start off with you. Nate mentioned a little bit about getting the private sector to work with the public sector, and those can be a little bit of a delicate dance to engage in. Sheldon, can you tell us a little bit of how you've brought public and private sector institutions together to start sharing and seeing the strength in numbers? Sheldon?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that Nate said. The only spin that I think we're adding to it is we're bringing universities, colleges, and high school environment into it. So we're starting with finding them new educational opportunities right from high school all the way to community college. We have a complete division that goes out and looks for employment for them, gathers up the funding for them. As a nonprofit, it's really easy for us to manage that funding envelope because we don't have to pay large salaries or, large facility bills. So I think that spin, by bringing younger people in, allows us to go out and solve those problems in a very unique way. It's an exciting time to see this sort of success that the CTI League is having, the new and emerging success that CyberNB is having in terms of coming together. I think it's always going to be a little bit difficult to bring government and private sector right down the middle, but it's one of those challenges that I think if we look at the success that we've already had, we can profit from there if we keep that moving forward.
Diplomatic, but with demonstrated ROI. Thank you for that. And it's always a challenge getting public-private sector together, but I think you struck a little bit of a neat recipe, and I'll probably want to talk to you a little bit offline about that. Randy, I've been chomping at the bit to ask you this question, so get ready for it, and then we'll go to Sergey. Randy, and this is the question about getting private and private sector to work together. Kaspersky is not the only feed. There are other feeds that are out there as well. How do you bring those feeds together, and how do you work collaboratively in a competitive environment? Randy?
Yeah, I think when it comes to CTI, there's room for a number of different actors to kind of play and providers to play. Most of the organizations that we speak to, especially those who are operating in multiple countries, multinational organization, really have a need to gather intelligence, kind of gathered from a few different angles. You think of it, if you're protecting your house, you don't just put a security camera on your front door pointing out and say, okay, I'm totally fine. You want to arrange your security cameras, to come at different angles so that they see different things from different perspectives. And I think that's one place where, Kaspersky, because of our heritage and our place in the global marketplace, we're collecting data from areas of the world where a lot of other threat intelligence providers, you just don't have that presence. So a lot of organizations, when they come and take a look at what we're offering, what is available to them, for free through sharing, their own data, and what other professional providers offer, they see that there's areas where there's not overlap. And the key for them is to figure out, one, what do their RFIs look like? What kind of data do they really need? Because novelty shouldn't be, you shouldn't add a feed just for novelty's sake. That novelty has to cover a gap. So understanding what you really need then allows you to decide, once you see who has overlap and who has unique information, make the decision what's beneficial, and then make your strategic investments, at that point.
Absolutely. And I think, Randy, going back to perhaps the thing when we had a session at Women in Cyber before that, you mentioned a good point, or maybe it wasn't you, but somebody from Kaspersky mentioned you need to know your blind spots, and you need to be humble enough to accept those and bring in other feeds as well. Well answered, Randy, as always. Mr. Sergey, I see your thumbs up, but now you got to win a thumbs up from Randy, because this question is for you. And this is more on the morphology of what constitutes a threat intelligence analyst. When I teach students in this space, one of the things that I tell them is, good threat intel folks are very good storytellers and very good readers. With so much happening, what advice can you give to budding threat intel folks around how best to prepare themselves to address some of these feeds and to get more better in this field of threat intelligence gathering? Sergey, your perspective.
Thanks, Ali. Again, it's quite easy from my humble opinion, from like a helicopter view. First, I would like to say to increase the immunity, to increase the security of your organization, especially with the threat intelligence, it's about anticipation of the attacks by identifying the weak spots in advance, checking actors' TTPs like tactics, techniques, and procedures, to adapt defenses and then monitor this. This is quite important. Again, as we discussed, especially right now, especially this after pandemic time, when the attacks are getting more and more complicated. And the recent pipeline attack is a very good example of this. We are tracking this guys since August, when they started this dark side ransomware group. We do have again quite solid private report about one of their operation, which is again available for our clients. So again, just to learn to know how it works, you do need to use the threat intelligence.
Absolutely, and great response to that question. And more importantly, I think it's also when Randy mentioned about automation, knowing how to work with different data science tools, knowing how to work with AI, machine learning algorithms as well, really helps you digest those volumes and those data lakes that we keep talking about. Sergey, thank you for your response. Nate, a very quick question while we're on this this discussion on getting involved in threat intelligence and being successful at threat intelligence and getting better. A question that's come in, and I'll read it verbatim. It says, is there an opportunity for fresh graduates to participate in your initiative with the CTI? Nate?
Yeah, there is. So you can go to the website is cti-league.com. So there should be a form on the front of the site, or if not, there's contact information at the bottom of the site to email in. We had temporarily shut off new member applications. What was unique about CTI League was we actually, and one of the reasons that the government was so willing to work with us is we actually vetted and verified everybody that joined. We had a team of people doing sort of pseudo background checks, checking people's LinkedIn profiles, making sure they were who they said they were. So yeah, if you go on the website, there should be a contact link. The focus has generally been on people who can actually come in and bring something to the table. We kind of said in the early days that it wasn't a spectator sport. Like, we understood that people wanted to be a sort of around something that was doing good for the world. But at the same time, we were like, well, if you're just here to sort of watch and sort of read, that was less of what we needed. We needed more active participation, more people that could say, hey, I've got this information, I've got this intel, I can share it. But it's still worth applying. And yeah, we definitely we want to bring people up, and then sort of echoing what Sheldon talked about. That's really cool to hear that this is starting to be taught. Right, cybersecurity and just this sort of general security mindset is something that we need to be teaching at a much earlier age, because when it comes down to it, most of these breaches are happening because a human is making a mistake, right? And they just don't understand that, oh, that email looked fishy, or that thing looked weird. That this is we teach our kids to look both ways before we cross the street. Are we teaching kids double check that email is who you think it's from before you open the attachment, right?
Absolutely. And to our audience, and those who want to get involved, I will say this: behind the mighty beard and the rugged facade is a very kind, caring individual. So reach out to him either on Cyber Exchange or reach out to him directly on their website. He'll be more than happy to guide you. Very, very, I really appreciate, Nate, your openness and your transparency. And hats off to you for the work that you do, my friend. Now, we've got about 8 minutes left, and a few questions have come in. Randy, I'm going to go to you, Sergey, and then we'll go to Sheldon. And Randy, I'm going to read this question out verbatim as well. It's a very direct question, so prep yourself. Can you have an effective defensive strategy without CTI? Randy, your time starts now.
I would say it all depends on the size of the organization, who's targeting you, and what approach they're taking. It's certainly the average small to mid-sized business probably doesn't need a threat intelligence practice, but it's certainly depending on the industry you're in. If you're capturing the attention of the types of threat actors that we track, it's valuable to understand their approach and what they might do to try and to attack you before any efforts were actually launched.
And I think that aspect about the size of the organization and how many people are in there, etc., and the operations all need to be factored in terms of who can actually action intelligence data. Sergey, same question for you. I'll repeat it again, exact same wording: from an effective defensive strategy without CTI. Possible, plausible? What do you think?
I'll start with some kind of a joke. My boss, Kostin Rai, just shared with me. He was asked, whom do you call when there is an accident? And there was like some kind of different smart replies. Was when Kostin said, listen, I will call first to the next pizza shop because we need something to eat while figuring out the attack. It will take a lot of time. It will take a lot of time. I mean, without CTI, it's on one hand quite complicated, but it's about, again, the maturity of the organization. It's about the knowledge you do have inside your organization, and the level of trust again. We do have, for example, at Kaspersky, we do have some kind of a training program. As soon as many years ago, we had an accident inside our organization. It was a tough decision whether to go public with this or not. Right. And we went public. It was an executive decision and a very smart decision. So based on that incident back in 2013, we created a training where we teach how to deal with the incident. I mean, the legal team, PR team, what to do, and so on and so forth. Even without the CTI, it's possible. It's possible to deal, but it will take time.
Absolutely, and time is something that we often don't have in these cases. But I think you've underscored a very important point, and that is, what do we mean by intelligence to begin with? In my humble opinion, it is the ability to adapt to change, and that's what these threat intelligence feeds allow you to do, is allow you to be adaptive to change, for lack of a better word. So thank you, Randy and Sergey, for dealing with that question. We've got about 5 to 6 minutes left. And Sheldon, I want to bring you into this conversation. There's been some discussion around how do you know that you're actually effectively bringing people together? How do you know that you're getting people to effectively share information, best practices, and threat intelligence with one another? Sheldon, some metrics that you probably want to alert our audience to?
Oh, that's pretty tough to understand, what data you're using, which ones are making the biggest impact. Turning to the threat intelligence in a smaller institution as opposed to a larger institution, I would also say that it really depends if you're outsourcing all of your security. And so I think that first question should be to your MSP. What are you using for threat intelligence? If you're insourcing all your security, I think the same question applies. What are you using for threat intelligence? So you can use a free one or a paid premium subscription. In terms of knowing whether or not you're doing a good enough job, I think a lot of tabletop exercises, making sure that your entire organization is getting the appropriate training. You mentioned earlier about clicking on emails, things like that. There's a lot of ways that you can measure how accurate and effective your security stance is.
Absolutely. And I think this aspect of tabletops, especially now, for example, here in Ontario, we're seeing virtualized environments of them and gamified environments. When you look at the responses with people, right? I think it's also so important. One of the things that I observed is you're trying to see if it's effective, how you're bringing people together, is who actually comes to the table. And it's for us, it's not just been the IT folks, right? With the on-check program in Ontario, it's been the marketing folks, the business folks, and that's where the conversations really begin to emerge from. So Sheldon, as always, spot on. I'll take the last round of questions, and Captain Nate, I will start off with you. And this is a bit of a technical one, so best to bring you into the conversation. Nate, what's the importance of attribution? Does that tie into trusting and verification? Does it matter to you at all? Nate, your perspective on attribution.
Everybody has an opinion on attribution, and mine is that it's not really that useful. I understand that everybody likes to give actors and groups a name, whether it's, bears or chemical elements or weird strings of UNC and stuff like that. I mean, at the end of the day, I think to a degree it can be helpful to understand certain actors use certain, either certain infrastructure, or we know they may, unfortunately, a lot of them will operate out of Russia because, it's almost impossible to extradite them. So, it is useful, I think, to a degree, but I think that the industry as a whole spends far too much time and brain cycles trying to figure out who done it when they should be figuring out how do we stop it.
Interesting. Nate, you and I definitely a beer once the world opens up, because there's some opinion and perspective that I'd like to share on that, but I'll reserve that in this case. Sergey, same question, because again, you work in Russia as well. Some perspective on attribution?
I definitely agree, 100% agree with Nate. And it's about understanding. For sure it will help, but still what will you do with this information? And at the end of the day, it's the job of law enforcement. It's the job of governments, states, but not for maybe security community, especially like we are. And for us, it's more about looking at the actionable intelligence, and this is the main thing, more than looking at the attribution.
Very interesting. Nate, you have too much of a fan club. I'm not going to argue with you. Forget that beard and that beer and that argument. I just have a degree. That just means I'm not intelligent. I just have the ability to memorize things. Anyways, Randy, let's come to you with some closing comments, because this is an interesting question, which I think I'm going to get everybody to provide 30 seconds on. Randy, we'll start off with you, kind sir. And that question is, do you think 5 years from now, we'll be talking about CTI in the same way? Randy?
I don't know if we'll be talking about it in the same way, but I think we'll be talking about it because as threats become more complex and more targeted, the value of intelligence will just increase. And my hope, and the reason that I wanted to talk about this subject today, is as we improve our ability to share intelligence in real time, from organization to organization globally. It will make us better prepared to react to new threats as they emerge, which will make these exploits, the chances for success for the threat actors to diminish. And that's really what it's all about. These attacks are launched with an end goal in mind. If we make that end goal less possible, less people will get into the game.
A tough question indeed. 5 years from now, I don't even know about 5 minutes from now, but yes, good approach to that, Randy. Sergey, let's go to you. We'll go to Sheldon and then the closing word to Nate. Sergey, 5 years from now, what do you think we'll be talking about?
I think, yes, we will talk, not necessarily the same way, but definitely we'll talk about CTI. And the thing is, again, two things. On one hand, the maturity of our organization is growing, the knowledge is growing, we are implementing new technologies and so on and so forth. At the same time, the maturity of the cyber criminals, attackers, is also growing. They are organizing in groups, they are working with each other. So it's like unstoppable competition. And unfortunately, that's why I do think that in 3, 5, 7 years, we'll still be trying to be successful into defending our infrastructures and information.
Fair enough. Sheldon, some Canadian perspective on that. 30 seconds if you can.
Yeah, I definitely think we'll be talking about it in the future. And I hope through advanced analytics and deep learning, we're talking about threat intelligence that is already attached to an asset on your network, so you can specify it.
Absolutely. Great point, Sheldon. And Nate, closing comments to you. Drop the mic, sir.
Yep, I definitely think we're going to be talking about it, and hopefully we'll be talking about remember back when the world all united against bad actors and we actually beat them. Because right now, I guarantee you, they're not on Twitter arguing about which thing happened. They're out there like scoping networks and breaking in. So I'm hoping that we need to collaborate as an industry better. So yeah, we'll still be talking about it. My hope is that we'll be talking about it as something that we won, and now we can go do cool things with computers instead of keeping people from breaking them.
As always, if ever there was a mic drop moment, Nate, you're the man for the occasion. Well done, Nate. Gentlemen and my friends, thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to ask you to stay on so we can have a 2-minute debrief in the green room. But again, you folks were fantastic. And thank you again for joining me today. To our audience, I want to thank you. We had quite a few viewers that were on. Some of you direct messaged me your questions. Some of you dropped in the live chat. We'll get even more engaging in the next few sessions as well with polls and a whole bunch of other interactive elements. From my end, the one thing that I can tell you is I definitely learned that intelligence is about asking the right questions. And many of you did exactly that. So thank you for helping me on that journey today. I also learned a very important fact that, listen, if there's anything that's inevitable, it's death, taxes, and a cyber threat. So let's prepare for that. Forewarned is forearmed. The next session for In the Node will be announced very, very soon, and you'll get a notification, if you get my play on words there, about when that session is going to happen, and you can register and process it in this exact same way and join it on the Cyber Exchange community. Also, for all of those of you who attended today, you will be getting a special thank you from the team at Kaspersky and lunch on them, or however you choose to use it. Thank you again for your time, wherever you are in the world. This is Ali Hirji signing off from In the Node. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you at the very next episode of In the Node. Cheers.